In this video, we are going to be building this version of the 4-wheel robot. Here I have used the Raspberry Pi Pico W as the microcontroller. I have also used 4 BO motors and I have used regular wheels. And this is the end product. At the end of this course, you will also have something which looks like this. This is the chassis that we are going to be using. These are the 4 BO motors that operate on 12 volts. And these are the screws and nuts that we'll be using for mounting the robot. Now we'll see how to attach the BO motor to the chassis using nuts and screws. First, we'll align one BO motor with the chassis like this. And then we'll insert the screws, 2 screws one by one. Next, we'll tighten the nuts for both the screws. The same process can be done for all 4 motors. After we repeat this process 3 more times, we will have something like this. On this chassis, I have already attached 4 BO motors with screws and nuts. Next, we'll also be soldering 2 wires on each motor for the positive and negative terminals. Next, we'll see how to attach the components that will power our robot. For powering our robot, we'll be using 3 18650 lithium-ion batteries. These batteries are 3.7 volts when discharged and around 4 volts when fully charged. This means that by using 3 cells, we'll have 12 volts in all to power our robot. We'll be using this 3-cell holder to hold the 3 cells together, and we'll be attaching this on a robot using double-sided tape. So in this way, I have attached it to the robot chassis, and finally I'll be attaching the 3 cells, inserting the 3 cells into the battery holder like this. Now we'll see how to attach all the important electronic components on the top of the chassis. Here I have this breadboard which already has a 2-sided sticky tape on the bottom, and I'll attach this here. I'll also attach this Raspberry Pi Pico W, which will be the main controller board of my robot. Now that that's done, I'll demonstrate how to attach these L298N motor drivers on your robot chassis. For these motor drivers as well, I'll be using 2-sided sticky tape and be attaching them on the top right corners of my robot. first motor driver has been attached. And now I'll attach the second one. And even the second motor driver has been successfully attached to the top of the chassis. Now it is important to note that these 4 points are where the wires from the motor will be inserted, which is why I have left this gap here so that while attaching the wires there is no trouble of less space. So it is important to note why I have left this gap right here. So in this way I have attached all the electronic components on the top of my robot chassis along with all the motors on the bottom side. Now an important thing here to note is that while working on your robot, it is always recommended to not have batteries inserted into your battery holder. I had inserted them earlier just to show how they go into the case. Now that I have removed all the batteries, I'll be showing you how the wires from the motor are inserted into the motor driver. On each motor driver we have these 4 pins where we'll be attaching the wires coming from the motor. These pins have screws on them such that when the screws are loosened, the hole is wider, and when the screws are tightened, the hole is small and it holds the wire in place. So as you can see, I have already loosened these 2 screws, and now I'll be inserting the wires from the motor into these holes. Now that the wires are completely inserted, I'll go ahead and tighten these screws. Similarly, all wires coming from the motors can be attached to the holes on all motor drivers. And just like that, I have attached all 4 wires into both the motor drivers. These terminals contain wires from each of the motors. So I've unscrewed the screws, inserted the wires and tightened them so they are firmly in place. Now this next component that I'll be talking about and attaching to the robot is this voltage step down converter. This is important since our batteries have a voltage of 12 volts and the Raspberry Pi Pico needs a voltage of 5 volts. Now this component has an input side and an output side. The 12 volts will be fed through the input side and we expect 5 volts to come out of the output. So now there are multiple areas where you can make a bridge, and I have soldered this bridge where there is 5 volts written. So I can expect an output voltage of 5 volts from this step down converter. I'll be attaching it to the bottom of my robot. Now while attaching it, make sure that the wires of the input are closer to the motor driver so that you'll be able to easily insert them to the terminals, and the wires of the output are closer to the breadboard so that you'll be able to attach them to the rails on the breadboard. So I've inserted the wires through the holes already present on the metallic chassis. and I'll just go ahead and press it so that it's firmly mounted on to the bottom of my chassis. And I have the wires here. Now on both the motor drivers, we'll see 3 terminals right here. This is the 12 volt input, this is the ground, and this is the 5 volt output. In some motor drivers, there is no terminal for the 5 volt output, and which is why this 12 volt step down converter is used in such cases. Now we'll be using 4 wires, 2 black and 2 red wires, to attach the 12 volt to the power rail on the breadboard. We'll be using these rails as the 12 volt rail and these rails as the 5 volt rail. So I've attached both the positive and negative wires from the 12 volt as well as the 5 volt rails on the breadboard. Now these wires will be attached to the motor driver. The output from the battery holder, the positive and negative, has been connected to the 12 volt rail. And I've also connected the 2 red and black wires on each motor driver for the 12 volt input. And I'll be attaching these to the 12 volt rail as well. After attaching these 4 wires, we can now power the Raspberry Pi from the 5 volt rail. Now we'll see how to power the Raspberry Pi Pico W using the 5 volt rail. I'll be using these 2 jumper wires to attach. I'll connect this to the positive rail and the black one to the negative side. Now here it is important to note that the second pin on this side of the Raspberry Pi Pico W is the 5 volt positive input, and the third pin on this side is the ground. And in this way, we can power the Raspberry Pi Pico W from the 5 volt rail. Now the last part of making the connections is attaching the control pins, the 4 control pins on this motor driver and the other 4 control pins on this motor driver to the GPIO pins on the Raspberry Pi Pico W. That can be done by using a set of 4 male to female jumper wires for each motor driver. As you can see, there are 4 pins on this motor driver and 4 pins on this motor driver. Now we have a choice of using 2 types of wheels. We can use the normal wheels to make a normal 4-wheeled motor. Like this. Or we can choose to have a 4-wheeled robot using Mecanum Wheels. The only difference while using Mecanum wheels is the software that will be covered in the next video.